Do not let fear hold you back, because one of the biggest things that you do have to fear, one of the biggest dangers, is that you allow fear to stop you from achieving your dreams until it's too late or until it becomes more difficult. I don't want to be that person who's 80 years old and then looks back and is like, I wish I'd gone traveling. I wish I'd seen San Francisco. I wish I'd gone to see India. Why didn't I do that? Hello, it's Janine, founder of Janine'sJourneys.com. Today I want to talk about whether it is safe to travel as a solo female traveller, because this is something that I encounter. This is a question which is more often put as a statement all the time. You know, when I first took my big trip abroad, which was a few years ago, I've been like abroad before that and abroad since, but when I took my big 8-month backpacking trip abroad, one of the things that I would hear the most often from well-meaning family and friends is, it's not safe, you know, you're a woman traveling by yourself. And listen, you know, I can kind of understand where this myth comes from. It comes from three places. It comes from the news. We hear all the time, don't we, about the gory, the scary, horrible things that happen to people abroad. We hear it in the news, you know, the backpackers that met untimely ends, or they got kidnapped. We see programs like Locked Up Abroad where people run into trouble. Sometimes it's not even their own fault, you know, they might get kidnapped by a group of mercenaries or guerrilla fighters, and they're just caught in the middle of some kind of catastrophe. And so you'd be surprised how much of the news people believe. Look, as a former journalist, I know more than anyone that bad news is good news. It makes the headlines. You know, I was never asked to write heartwarming stories about travellers that went overseas, had a ball, had a blast, and came back to tell the tale. That isn't something that is often promoted in the mainstream media. That's why you've got so many travel blogs, people telling their own stories. And the other place it comes from is fear of the unknown, you know, because another thing that we often hear in the news about these foreigners, these people from other countries, there's a lot of kind of xenophobia and, you know, the twisting of facts or the exaggeration of facts that we hear in the news, you know, so these other people from these other places are coming to get you. So we naturally think, well, if I go to where they are, then perhaps I'll be in more danger. Maybe they don't see women the same way in those countries that they do in this one, so it's going to be more dangerous. And of course, another place where it comes from is just our struggles as women. You know, we do statistically face that little bit more danger than, say, men. It's always more dangerous for a woman walking alone by herself at night than it is for a man to do the same thing. And we know, don't we, that as women we face our fair share of weirdos all the time. I know I do. I mean, just the other day, right? Some guy, he's in his 60s, morbidly obese, really weird, and he tried to get my number. He tried to start chit chat about the weather, and then he was like, oh, can I have your number? And I'm like, no. So, you know, we do have to deal with these common pests, as I call them, as women, these delusional nuisances. But listen, these crazy people are everywhere. I actually meet them more in my hometown, in my familiar town of Leeds, or it's a city, but I meet them on my home turf more than I do abroad. That doesn't mean that England is dangerous. I mean, maybe you're not watching from England. You might be watching from America, for example, or somewhere in Europe or Japan or wherever you are. We're always more familiar with our home turf, so it feels safer. We've got that idea that we're, you know, that we're not going to face any dangers because we know this place. Look, we know that the world isn't as it's presented on the news. We know that logically. So, for example, You don't see people killing each other or stabbing each other all the time or trying to kidnap each other all the time. Hopefully you don't anyway. So we know that this stuff, it happens, yes. And a lot of people think, oh, it won't happen to me. It does happen. It is out there. So you do have to take precautions as you do anywhere you go. But we know that it doesn't happen as often as you would think it would just watching the news, because the bigger, the scarier stories, it's this. The reason why the media is like this, it's this rush to present something that people haven't seen before, to get that shock factor, to get those clicks like, oh my god, this terrible thing has happened, because then you start talking about it with your friends. When the big Grenfell fire happened in London, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about what that was. If you're not familiar with the event, you can always sort of Google it, but it was when this big tower block in London caught fire. My mum was on the phone with me and she was like, oh, did you read about that? Like, did you see it? Oh, wow, and people are like that. It gives people something to talk about, this shock factor. There's also this element, isn't there, of liking to be sort of outraged, wanting to be outraged. I'm not talking about sort of outrage culture where people get offended very easily. I'm talking about this general sense of wanting to be shocked, wanting to get fired up about something, and the news gives it to us good, doesn't it? Oh, it really. Listen, if you're feeling zen, if you're feeling at peace with the world and stuff, but you want a bit of that anger, you want to get some of that fear factor in, watch the news. You will not be disappointed, I promise you. I used to work in it. I used to be drowning in it every day. All these various headlines. Most often than not, I'd get promotional press releases and people wanting to promote like lovely stuff, like an animal rescue centre that just opened up, and the editor would say, okay, yeah, that can go in the back somewhere, but put this in, this is a stabbing that happened like 2 weeks ago or something, but it's still a hot topic. We can approach it from a different angle. Oh my god, I had to get out of it because I love journalism. I'm a journalist at heart. I do my own journalism now, but bad news is just too sexy for me. I like to also present the world as it is, including my travel adventures. I like to show people that actually it isn't as scary as people make it out to be. And you can face dangers anywhere. I'll give you an example. So at home a few years back, I was in my flat lying down. It was a Saturday morning. I remember this clear as day, and the fire alarm went off, and I'm like, oh, not again. Honestly, in the flat that I was living in, it was always going off. So annoying. So I reluctantly got out of bed. Nothing happening around my flat. I opened the door to my actual flat. Again, didn't see anything, didn't smell anything funny. I saw my neighbour who lived opposite open her door, and because we lived inside a block of flats, so I went downstairs. Nothing was wrong with the flat. I opened the main door to the building, popped my head out, and I could just see this cloud of black billowy smoke. See, because the neighbours next to us, her flat was on fire and she was disabled, so she wouldn't have been able to get out by herself. Somehow between us we managed to get her out. We called the fire brigade. Her flat was burnt. It was, so she had to get that rebuilt. But the fireman said something that really struck me at the time. He said, if you guys had waited just another 10 minutes, or if we hadn't been able to come for like another 10 minutes or so, he said the whole block would have come down. So I should have been in the safest, my point in telling this, I should have been in the safest place in the whole wide world. At home, in bed, door locked, no weirdos, well, apart from me. It should have been so perfectly safe. But it wasn't, there were dangers present. So even if you spent your whole life just sat at home, door locked, just ordered everything from Amazon or whatever and worked from home and never left the building, it's still not a guarantee. And that's why in this blog, I'll never say, listen, if you take precautions, do all the right things, then traveling is 100% safe. Because, there's a danger of falling into either extremes. Oh, it's really dangerous, you'll definitely face danger. And oh, it's super, super, super safe and you'll never face it. I'm actually somewhere in the middle. I'm actually like, actually, there are precautions you need to take as a female traveller, which are very similar to the precautions that you would take at home. And a lot of it's common sense, but common sense isn't always common practice. And plus, I give some of my own safety tips so you can avoid making some of the mistakes I made when travelling, and I'll put those in a blog link below. And I made lots of silly mistakes on traveling, not researching where I was going properly, not arranging things or planning things properly in advance or knowing how to go about it. And it left me like sometimes standing in the middle of a street like Bangkok. I was in the middle of Bangkok at 2 o'clock in the morning. The night bus had just dropped me off and I'm like, shit, what do I do now? Nothing bad happened apart from me getting lost, but there are things that you can do to avoid that silly mistake that I made, and I go through that in my blog, and all the relevant links as usual will be below this video. But again, my point is it's not as unsafe as people make out. The myth that I want to tackle is not that you'll be 100% safe or 100% unsafe. It's actually the idea that if you go traveling, you'll be in significantly more danger than you would be if you just traveled around your own country. That's the myth, because everybody thinks that their home turf is safe. Your home turf might be the US, your home turf might be Canada or France or somewhere other than England or wherever it is. But actually, everybody feels that way about their home. That's the point. But I think it's important to break through that fear barrier. Any fear, there are all kinds of fears associated with anything. And you notice sometimes how we cheat ourselves out of our dreams. Sometimes we're even encouraged to. So my dream was always to travel, to meet people, and to have that lifestyle. But maybe your dream is to become a scientist. Maybe your dream is to run a business or something like that. And we find ways to talk ourselves out of it. Oh, I'll be rejected. They won't like my idea. I'm not clever enough. I'm not smart enough. And I can't even acquire the skills that I need to do to get where I need to go. That's just another way of saying it's not safe. Because when you allow fear to hold you back, you're trying to safeguard something, whether it's your feelings, whether it's your physical safety, or whether it will force you to confront a part of yourself that you just haven't explored before. So these fears crop up with anything that we do in life, but especially when it comes to traveling, to adventure, because people close to us, they'll get, they're not being malicious when they try to discourage you. If anything, they're trying to protect you. But what I want you to take away from this video is, as a woman who has gone traveling extensively and consistently by herself, I mean, okay, look, just because I've been safe, it doesn't mean that everybody will be safe. But my point is not that. My point is that you shouldn't let those little fears, those little doubts, prevent you from going in the first place. If you take precautions, you're more than likely, there's a higher likelihood that you'll be just fine. So here's myth number 2, that you'll be lonely, that what's the point in traveling yourself? You won't be able to enjoy it. Nobody will talk to you anyway, right? Actually, that's not true either, because you see, I found that more people came up and started conversations with me when I went traveling by myself. Because you're easier to approach when you're by yourself. If you were with a big group of people, people might not approach you so easily. So for example, one of the places I went to an island called Koh Phangan in Thailand, and I would sit on a beach called Siratanu Beach, just laying there enjoying the sun, and that was the easiest way for me to make friends. People came up to me, friendly people, normal people, came up to me all the time, men and women, and just started conversations. Why? Because you see, they were in the same boat. You'd be surprised how many other people out there are doing exactly what you're doing, traveling the world, exploring, having adventures alone. So there's these whole communities. There are these expat communities, traveler communities. They're absolutely everywhere. I found them all over Asia. You could probably find them in parts of Africa too. And the most important way for you to break through that fear barrier, as well as listening to testimonials by people like me who've been traveling, and of course I'm saying it's safe because I've been traveling extensively, but it's also important to talk to, maybe somebody who's been traveling, maybe other women, because this is particularly aimed at women. This is something that women tend to face more so than other people. I'm not saying men don't have these things thrown at them, but especially if you're a woman, oh, it's unsafe, it's unsafe. Speak to other women who have gone traveling. You can find groups on Meetup, for example. That's just off the top of my head. You can find all kinds of, there's the Lonely Planet Travel Forum. There are all of these different forums where you can speak to people. You can find out a place before you go, because in any country, in any big city, there are going to be dodgy areas. There are parts of England I wouldn't go to because it's just, a bit more dangerous. That's where I would take precautions. But you see, that's part of taking precautions, isn't it? Researching, okay, would it be safe for me to come here as opposed to there? Is it safe for me to take this drink, to buy drinks in this bar and to trust that nothing dodgy is going to happen to it? All of those little things that you might not necessarily be able to work out unless you research it, unless you talk to other people who have been, particularly other women who have done what you want to do. Like I said, there's no guarantees. Safety, the only guarantees in life are death and taxes. Sad but true. However, in terms of whether you're in immediate danger if you go abroad or if you're more likely to face problems, the answer is no. And if you're a cautious person, that no is a little bit stronger. Obviously, this vlog doesn't apply if you go into a war zone like Afghanistan, if you go into the middle of Baghdad, or, some place where there's a lot of fighting, then this blog probably isn't relevant. But if you go into a normal country that's at peace, um, again, it is just a normal country. You have to be careful, but do not let fear hold you back, because one of the biggest things that you do have to fear, one of the biggest dangers, is that you allow fear to stop you from achieving your dreams until it's too late or until it becomes more difficult. I don't want to be that person who's 80 years old and then looks back and is like, I wish I'd gone traveling. I wish I'd seen San Francisco. I wish I'd gone to see India. Why didn't I do that? And then it's probably not too late if I'm a fit 80-year-old and I can still get around, but it'll be harder and it won't be as nice and as great if I went when I'm young and when I'm fit and healthy and can get around and can navigate my way around better. I don't want to be on my deathbed surrounded by the ghosts of all the dreams that I didn't fulfill when I had the chance. You see, because it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. It's hard to see what opportunities are open to you and what you can do when you're in the middle of living your life. That's why you have to kind of step outside a little bit or speak to other people who have been, because they've got an outside view. And so you kind of just have to almost get away from yourself a little bit to find out, okay, actually I can do this. I can break through the fear barrier. There should be no fear, no real fear when it comes to traveling. If you've put everything in place and you've done everything as it should be done, then you'll face no problems. And I'll go into this more detail in my blogs below. I give safety tips and information and how to avoid mistakes that I made when I'm traveling. But the world isn't as scary as people often make it out to be. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. I think I've made my point and I don't want to go on and on and on about the same thing. But hopefully that gives you some food for thought. Hopefully I've inspired at least just one person to find out more information and then to go for it. Just do it. And if you like this video and you got something out of it, then give it a like, a little bit of a thumbs up. Show this YouTube newbie some love. And if you really like this video and you want more travel tips and information, because I'm going to keep them coming, then do subscribe, because I'll do regular updates and travel tips, including some you may not have thought about. Until next time, guys, take care.